Do you guys know much about the Nobel Prize? Like, I'm sure that you all at least have heard of it. Do you know much about, like, where it came from, why it's there, any of that kind of stuff? Do you guys know much about it? It's kind of a funny story. Funny, I guess. The guy that left the money as a prize for the Nobel Prize, if you can guess. His last name was Nobel. His first name was Alfred, and he was one of 8 children, 4 of whom made it to adulthood. But Alfred was an interesting kid because he took after his dad. His dad was an inventor. He was a businessman. He was not always a very successful businessman, but he was, he was an interesting guy. And so Alfred wanted to be like him. He learned to be a chemist and a physicist, and he was very interested in science and things. But Alfred was the kind of guy that became wealthy and became well-known because of some certain inventions that he developed and patented. The two that was probably the biggest or the most famous inventions of Alfred Nobel were the blasting cap and dynamite. Alfred was a pyromaniac, I guess. He was very good at creating explosives. His father had done a lot of work with nitroglycerin, but it had been way too unstable. It had been way too unsafe to work with. Nobody could really use it for the things they needed it for, like clearing roadways and railroad tunnels and canals and those kinds of things. And so Alfred wanted to find a way to be able to make it more useful, more stable. And so kind of by accident, he found a way to mix it with basically clay and stabilize it, and it became dynamite. And he named it after the Greek word dynamo, or power, right? And so he became pretty famous for that, and most of his inventions, most of his things centered around explosives. For most of his adult career, he was involved not only in making dynamite and things like that, but he was involved in making things that would later become what the British used in their bullets rather than gunpowder. He created explosives. By the time he died, he had 90 factories, and pretty much all of them were producing ammunition of some sort. And he had never been like a mean guy. He was kind of the typical guy that we think of when we think of rich inventors. He was kind of like a Howard Hughes of the explosives world, where he didn't really have a lot of close friends. He didn't spend a lot of time with people. He was much more comfortable in a lab or in his office or whatever, experimenting and learning and doing those kinds of things. He wasn't he wasn't a mean person. He just wasn't a very people person. But he had always been generous with his money. He had always been, willing to help out. But he had had lots of interests, like I said, chemistry, physics, even medicine. And he even was an author, though he never actually had anything published. He wrote all kinds of poems and stories and songs and things, and they were just stored in his house. But the crazy thing was that when he finally died in 1897, they went to open up his will, which was stored in a bank in France. And when they opened the will and began to read, pretty much everyone was surprised to find out that he had left pretty much all of his money to be awarded to people in chemistry, physics, literature, and most of all, peace. He wanted people to be awarded for finding ways to create peace among people. And that was kind of odd coming from this guy who had been creating explosives and all kinds of stuff. And so they went with it, but for a long time it was kind of a mystery as to why Nobel had left his money to do all of this. But it really wasn't that big of a mystery because, you see, about 9 years before he passed away, his brother had passed away in France. His brother's name was Ludwig, I believe. His brother had passed away in France, and somehow the country of France basically had mixed up brothers and had told everyone that it was not Ludwig Nobel, but it was Alfred Nobel who had passed away. And so all of the papers were printing stories about how Alfred Nobel had passed away. Well, Alfred got to see these newspapers, and he saw things like titles of articles that said, "The Merchant of Death is dead." Most of the articles talked about how he had become rich off of finding ways to kill more people at one time than had ever been possible before. And so Alfred read these things. He was able to get a glimpse of what people really thought about him, and it changed him. Think about that. A lot of times we'll have things like living memorials, or we'll have gatherings to try to celebrate the life of people, even like at retirement parties. Have you ever stopped and thought about that? A retirement party is kind of like a living funeral. It's kind of scary. But we get to those things and we talk about how much we love this person and how great they are, but you still know they're alive, so there are always a few things that you might kind of hold back a little bit. At this point, everybody thought Alfred was dead. There was no holding back. And he got to see what people really thought about him, about his life's work, about everything that he had done. And he wasn't so happy about it. This morning, we're going to talk about Mark chapter 13. Mark chapter 13 is going to be an interesting chapter because it's a glimpse of things to come. It's a glimpse of things to come, and it's going to have an effect on the disciples. It's going to have an effect on the church. It's going to have an effect on the world. And I know that seems like a big deal or an over-exaggeration, but literally it has one of the biggest impacts on the rest of the world. And so what we're going to talk about this morning is a difficult topic. We're going to read all of chapter 13 because you can't pick and choose verses out of this. You've got to read the whole thing. So if you want to start flipping there, we're going to be in Mark chapter 13. I do have the words up on the screen. When I went to go make Bible app notes, I couldn't find the thing to make events. It disappeared. So we might have to find a new way of doing Bible notes if you want to use them on your phone, because apparently the program we were using changed, and we're going to have to figure that out. But Mark chapter 13. So here's the thing. We're going to talk about the people who went through and broke the Bible down into chapters and verses and all of that, decided that the best heading for this chapter was the destruction of the temple and signs of the ends of the time. Signs of the end of time. And before we get going on this, before we even read this, I just want to tell you, I always have to give this disclaimer, and I'm not apologizing. But I want you to understand that I know that this is a topic that people are very passionate about. This is something that people have very strong views about. And so if I say something that you don't agree with this morning, that's okay. I'm not asking you to agree with me on everything. What I want you to do, though, is try to put aside some of those strong feelings and just understand that I'm trying to help explain some of the things that Scripture says and what it means, and it may not always mean what we've been raised to think it means. Okay? So again, you don't have to pick up things and stone me, and if you don't agree with me at the end, that's fine. You don't have to come and kill me at the end. It's really okay. I still love Jesus. I still know that he is my Lord and Savior and that he is God's Son, so you don't have to be worried about that. I'm just saying sometimes when we see things like end times, we can have some very strong opinions. And they don't always have to agree. So, hopefully that gave you time to get to Mark chapter 13. Starting in the first verse, Mark writes this: As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings. Do you see all these great buildings?" Jesus replied, "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are all about to be fulfilled?" Jesus answered them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am he,' and will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. These are the beginnings of birth pains. You must be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to them. And the gospel must first be preached to all nations. Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and father his child. Children will rebel against their parents. That doesn't seem like an end of the times thing. That's just a natural thing, right? Excuse me, I'm sorry. That was my own little opinion. I'm sorry. Brother will betray brother, father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. Sometimes I think my kids do want to do that. Everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down or enter the house to take anything out. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that this will not take place in winter, because those will be days of distress, unequaled from the beginning, when God created the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, whom he has chosen, he has shortened them. At that time, if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Messiah," or "Look, there he is," do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So be on your guard. I have told you everything ahead of time. But in those days, following that distress, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Verse 32, but about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard. Be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone. Watch. Sometimes, I know that was a lot, but sometimes I think it's nice just to be able to read Scripture together. I know that's a lot of verses to go over, but it's one continuous thing. It's hard to take that and pick it apart and say, well, let's just talk about this part or this part or this part, because they all depend on each other. And so we're taking a look at a big chunk, but I think we can handle it. Now, here's where this all starts to get interesting for us, right? Nobel, he was able to see, not necessarily the future, but he was able to get a glimpse of kind of the way the world is, what it would be like when he died, at least if things stayed the same. And he wasn't ready for it. He wasn't prepared for it. He didn't like how his life would come to an end if it had come that day. And so he decided to make some changes. At this moment, Jesus is trying to help his disciples prepare for a change. He's trying to help them see what's coming, because the disciples are a lot like us. Jesus has been in the temple. He's been teaching, right? They already know, at least have a grasp of the idea that the temple system is going away, right? We've talked about that. We've talked about how we are moving, that God is moving away from the temple and the sacrifices because those aren't necessary anymore, that God is replacing them with something better, with something bigger. And so he's replacing them with Jesus. And now they're looking around and they've seen all kinds of amazing things happening in the last week. I mean, they've spent 3 years with Jesus, but this 1 week seems to have taken a major toll or has had a huge impact on their view of Jesus and what he's doing and what God is doing. And they look around, and I know we've talked about this, but they are trying to impress upon Jesus. Like, this temple has taken 40 years to build, and it's still not done yet. And some of these stones that they're talking about, when they say, look at these stones, there were some of them that were up to 400 tons. Like, we marvel at the pyramids and how these primitive people were able to move all these stones and stack them and do these stones. Some of them were like 4 times as big as the pyramid stones. This was a marvel. And not just because it was the Jewish temple, not just because Herod was, an egomaniac, but because, this thing, it stood out. It stood out from its size, from its wealth, every point of this thing made you think impregnable. And that's what it was thought to be. People thought that no matter what, even if Rome decided to attack, they could get into the temple, and there is no way that Rome would be able to get them out of the temple. Unfortunately, they would be proven wrong. But these disciples are saying, look, this is magnificent. This is lasting. This is the symbol of our nation. Look how strong God has made our nation. And Jesus says, are you ready for it to go away? That's got to be a startling statement. That is a huge hit to your confidence, right? And so when they get out of the city and there's a minute where some of the disciples can come away, Peter, James, John, Andrew, those 3 that were kind of the inner circle, and Andrew, I guess, maybe got to tag along since he was Peter's brother, I don't know. But these 4 come to Jesus and they're like, wait, hold on. We are just beginning to wrap our heads around how you are changing how we worship God. We're just beginning to get our heads around all the things that God is doing through you and who you are. And now you're telling us not only is our spiritual life going to change, but we have to deal with an actual change to our nation now. How are we ready for this? And like them, I think part of our human nature, I guess, is that we just can't get away from disaster. Like, we don't want to be struck by disaster, but we can't not watch it. That's why, reality TV is so popular, I think, is because not that it's, that great of entertainment, it's that we love to watch just train wrecks of people. We can't look away. It's like why we can't seem to... One of the things that just annoys me to no end, when you're driving on a road and you hit traffic and you come to find out that the reason that there is traffic there is not because there's anything in your lane, but because everyone else is slowing down to look at the wreck over there as they go by. We have to look, we have to see. And so these disciples, they want to know the disaster. They want to know the terrible things. They want to see and experience, or they want to be ready for the worst. And so they go to Jesus and they say, Jesus, what should we look for? How are we going to be ready for this? Can you tell us when is this going to happen, and what are the signs that we should look for to know that it's coming? And so I want you to understand that, and this is where you might start to not like me, I don't know, but most of this chapter, if not all, and we can argue about this later, but this answer that Jesus gives is an answer to a specific question. Most of the time, we want to take these things and say, look, all these bad things are going to happen, and that's when the world is going to end. There's going to be wars and rumors of wars. There's going to be famines and earthquakes. There's going to be people betraying each other. The world's going to go to hell in a handbasket, and then Jesus is going to come and take us away. We won't have to deal with it anymore. But when you actually look at the context of this passage, Jesus is talking about a specific incident at a specific point in time to a specific group of people. And what I want us to learn from this, and what I think Jesus was trying to get them to understand, is that even when the world feels like it's coming to an end, even when it feels like everything is falling apart, don't be distracted. Don't be led away. Jesus' first command, his first idea is, watch out that none of you are deceived. Don't be deceived. Jesus is worried that with all of this going on, with all of this bad stuff happening, with people coming in and ruining the Jewish way of life, with people coming in and murdering people, look, all of these things that Jesus talks about, you can go through and find in the next generation, in the next 40 years, and point to where all these things happen. And I mean, at least for the most part. You can go through and see where there were wars and rumors of wars in the Roman Empire, where people were, where Rome was starting to struggle with all kinds of barbarians and with other nations, and they were fighting, and so it wasn't even just external stuff, it was internal stuff. Within 1 year of the Roman Empire, there were 4 different men that were fighting to be the Caesar, to be the Roman ruler. Within 1 year, within AD 69, I believe, the middle of 69 into 70, there were 4 different emperors who had fought each other, and then finally when the last guy actually won, his nephew, at the moment, now I'm blanking on his name. While the Caesar was making his way into Rome as the conquering Caesar, it was almost the exact same time that his nephew Titus was making his way into Jerusalem and wiping out the Jews. And during this time, the 40 years between Jesus' death and the destruction of the temple in AD 70 was a mess, and there were all kinds of problems, but those last 4 years, between 66 and 70, were just a mess. And when Rome came in to conquer Jerusalem, I don't know if you've heard all the stories, but there are things from people like Josephus and other historians who talked about the siege that Rome put onto not only just the city of Jerusalem and the temple, but they went out to, the stronghold, what? Masada, right? At Masada. I don't know if we can even imagine what this would be like, but they were so hungry. They were so cut off from the rest of the world. Everything was going so wrong. They were so hungry and thirsty that mothers were actually eating their children. There were reports of mothers cannibalizing their babies within the city of Jerusalem and Masada. There were stories of how the people that were within those places, they were killing each other for the opportunity to gain a little bit of political power to possibly get out of the situation. There was even one report within, I think Josephus again, he said that during this siege, more Jews were killed by Jews than by Romans. They were so scared, they were so afraid, everything seemed to be going so wrong for them that they turned on each other and started killing each other. All of these things, the wars, the rumors of wars, all this stuff that's going on, the famines and earthquakes, the mothers, those stories, that's why I think Jesus was talking about it would be terrible for mothers and pregnant women in those days, right? There was even a story of how there was a group of people who lived on the east side of the Jordan, And when Rome had attacked, they were trying to flee to Jerusalem to find sanctuary within Jerusalem, probably within the temple. And they had gotten to the Jordan River at night, and it was it wasn't quite at flood stage, but it was really high. And so they had to stop and try to figure out, do we chance this and we all drown in the river? Or do we wait till we can find a place to cross and chance the Romans catching up to us? Well, they had stopped, and the Romans did catch up to them and killed every one of them. All of these terrible things happening, right? I'm just trying to get you to understand, and Jesus was trying to help these disciples know that the world may go to hell in a handbasket. But look what he says. It's in, oh man, now I lost it. I'm sorry. But he said, all of this is going to happen, but the end is still to come. Right? In verse 7, Jesus is saying, all this stuff might happen, and it's going to happen, and you are going to look around and think the world cannot get worse. But Jesus says, that's not the end. The end is still to come. That all of those things are just the beginning of the birth pains. The birth pains, I don't ever want to be a woman. I don't want to have to give birth. But the pain that you go through, the struggle that you go through, because you get the life at the end, right? Because you get that child. And Jesus is trying to get them to understand probably better than we would, because they were more, men were more involved in that birthing process than we are today. But Jesus is getting them to understand, look, these are terrible things. They're awful problems. They're incredible pains. But it's to birth something better. Now, here, this is what I want you to get, is that these guys who were going through this, who were seeing that there were going to be terrible things happening, and in the end, even their nation was going to be destroyed. All the bad things, the rumors of wars, the earthquakes, the famines, the turning on each other, the killing each other, all this stuff was going to happen, and the nation at the end of this was going to be destroyed. The abomination that causes desolation, there was basically what that means. It goes back to Daniel. And Daniel was prophesying that something bad was going to happen, which would stop the worship in the temple. And what that, in 165 AD, that ended up being a conquering army had come in, and a king had gone in, set up an idol to Zeus, and sacrificed a pig on the altar. And they thought, there's no way we can continue worship with that. And so that eventually led to the Maccabean revolt, right? That was what kind of set it off. They were like, this can't happen. They drove all these armies out, and they were able to maintain autonomy for about 100 years. But that was the beginning of the Maccabean revolt, that somebody had come in, built an altar in the temple, and sacrificed a pig on the altar. For Jesus and for the disciples, what he's saying is, not only is there just going to be a pig sacrificed on the altar, there's not just going to be an idol in the temple. What's going to happen is that Rome is going to come into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, and destroy it. It won't be left. And I guess what I struggle with this is that we worry about the end of the times. We worry about signs. We worry about all this kind of stuff, right? What Jesus just wanted them to get, what he wanted to entrust them with, was that when we face a world that is telling us that we're wrong, that everything we believe is a lie, when we face people who are starting wars in the world, when we face food shortages, gas shortages, when we face supply chain problems, when we face workers who don't want to go to work, or when we face all the kinds of things that we look at in our world today, and we think, man, this must be the signs of the end of the time. Jesus is saying, hold on. Even if America ceases to be, I don't know if that's going to be. I don't know if God has that in his plan. I don't know what that looks like in the future. But Jesus is leaving us a message that says, even when all of these things seem to be going wrong, and even if a nation comes to an end, your identity as a people group comes to an end, Do you still follow Jesus? There are a lot of people out there right now that they tie those things so closely together that they don't see the world being able to continue without America. They don't see Jesus being able to continue without the American church. And yet the church is thriving in other places where they don't put their dependence on the country. In fact, they are fighting against the country itself. And all I'm trying to say is that I think Jesus wants us to know and understand that we see these things, and he doesn't want us to worry about if it's the end of the world. He wants us to know that when it is dark, when it seems like there is no hope, Jesus still is Lord. Even if your country identity comes to an end, your identity is as a kingdom person, not an American, or not a European, or a Englishman, or whatever. Name the country. It doesn't matter what your identity should be, who you should follow. Jesus is ushering in the new kingdom. That's who you are. God is close, and he is working, and he is bringing to birth a new kingdom. Now, I know that speaking to a specific time in a specific place doesn't always sit well with people, and they want to say, well, yes, it does look forward to a future time, and I think that's great. And let me just touch on that right quick before we end this morning. But when we look forward to what Jesus will do, say, I am full aware that I could be completely wrong, and that's not just talking about a specific time and a specific place to a specific people. Say Jesus is moving forward and looking not just to that thing, but to the end of the world. There's still something that we need to pay attention to. In the counter or parallel story, in Matthew's version of this passage, he talks about the same things, but when he gets to the part where it talks about the date and the hour unknown, right? The day and the hour unknown, Matthew has a little bit more to say about what's going on. In verse 36, he says, but the day and the hour no one knows, right? That sounds right. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. So that's all the same as Mark. But then Matthew adds on this. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. For in that day, before the flood, people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, and one will be taken and the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time the night thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. So here's where another point where you might start to disagree with me and think that I'm kind of off my rocker, but trust me, I'm not just coming up with this on my own. I think it's interesting how we forget that Jesus has this part about Noah. See, what happened when the flood came? What happened was God wiped away the evil and the good people were left. So many times we have been taught, and again, please don't throw things at me, but so many times we have been taught that Jesus is going to come and take away all the good people and just leave all the bad people behind on the earth. But when you read this in context, when you read the people about the people spinning or grinding or walking up the hill, and one disappears and one stays, the impression that you get when you add in this idea of Noah and the flood and God saving people to stay on the earth and other people being washed away because they were evil and would not turn to God, you begin to understand that instead of being the person that is taken away and watching out to be watching for the day when God's going to take us away, you're supposed to be watching for the day when God takes the evil away. You're supposed to be watching for the day when God comes, and those people were eating and drinking and giving in marriage and doing all these things, and it wasn't until the flood happened that they realized that they were in trouble. We often think that God is going to come and take us away to heaven and we'll be happy and safe, and then we don't have to worry about the world anymore. But when you understand that God is going to come back, see, God is going to come back to his creation. There's a verse in 1 Thessalonians that we often use to talk about this as well. It's in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. It says, brothers and sisters, 1 Thessalonians 4:13, brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind, who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. So again, we usually take things like Matthew and combine them with what Peter says to the Thessalonian church, and we think, okay, we're going to meet the Lord up in the air, and again, that means that we're going to be going away. The rest of the world can just go and burn, go do whatever. We don't have to worry about it anymore, and we'll go be with the Lord forever in heaven. Let me challenge you with this. When Paul is talking about going to meet the Lord in the air, he's not necessarily talking about going to meet God in heaven. The standard, the usual practice when a king returned to his kingdom was that the people would go out to meet the king. And as the king was coming to his kingdom, they would welcome him in. They would go out and meet him, and then they would usher him in. They would accompany him back into the city. And if you don't believe me, just look a couple chapters back to when Jesus came to Jerusalem. All of the people went out right on Palm Sunday and laid their coats down and the palm leaves down. It was because they had gone out to meet the king, and they were ushering him back into Jerusalem to establish him as the king of Jerusalem. They didn't go out and meet him to be king of the wilderness. They went out to bring him into what they thought would be God's kingdom on earth. When Paul talks about we will go up and meet Jesus in the sky, in the air, it's so that we can bring him down, we can usher him in, we can give him the fanfare and the parade that he deserves as he enters into his kingdom. And the reason I think that's important, why Jesus puts this here, why he talks about that, is what kind of kingdom do you want to usher Jesus into? The application for us is if we are to be prepared and be watching and be affecting our world for the king to come, it means that's why we have an importance on our political decisions or on our economic decisions or on how we treat people, how we treat the poor, how we do all these things that we argue about and fight about race or whatever the world is trying to yell and scream at us about. The reason that we care about them is because if we are going to usher Jesus back into this earth to be king, to take over as the king, what are we leaving him? What's he going to arrive and see what we have done with what he has left us? That's what we're left with. Are we prepared? Are we watching? Are we waiting for Jesus to return? Let me end with this. There was a job posting during World War II. It was for a Morse code operator. And a group of people had gone into this office to interview for this job as a Morse code operator, and they were all there carrying on conversations, talking about where they had been and what they'd been doing, and just the things you normally talk about when you sit around with people. As these conversations were going on, as they were waiting their turn to be interviewed, suddenly one of the applicants jumped up, ran through the door. They all kind of sat there and looked like, what's going on? After about half an hour or so, the man that had gone running out of the door came back through the door, smiling. I got the job. Everyone else looked at him. How'd you get the job? How did you get ahead of us? The man said, well, while you were all talking, there was a message sent over the radio in Morse code. The first one who hears this message and interprets it can come to my office and I'll give them the job. They were all there. They were all present, but not all of them were waiting. Not all of them were looking. Not all of them were actually paying attention to what was going on. Jesus' call here in this passage is, are you paying attention, and are you ready to listen and be prepared for what's going on? Because when all of this goes bad, people are going to take advantage of it. They're going to try to pull you away. But you have to remember that even when things seem the darkest, Jesus is still Lord. Are you waiting to hear what he has to say? Are you waiting for his commands? Are you looking for him, not just saying that you're there and present, but are you actually anticipating being able to bring Jesus here to heal his creation? Let's pray.